My name is Thomas. I've been working the late shift at our local Burger King for about 2 years now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the rent and the hours work for me. I'm a night owl anyway, so being behind the drive-thru window from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. doesn't bother me the way it would most people. This all started maybe a month ago. I was working the drive-thru solo. We're usually understaffed after midnight, and that's when a car pulled up to the speaker. A male voice, pretty unremarkable. He ordered a large double Whopper with cheese meal with a Coke. It was standard. The one notable thing about the encounter was when he went to pay. He only rolled the window down just enough to slide his card through, and his windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see his face at all. He paid, and I handed him his receipt, but then he just drove off, like, without stopping at the second window to grab his food. I waited there with his bag for a few minutes, wondering if he'd be coming back. Eventually, I just set the order aside and ended up eating it later. People do weird stuff sometimes, so I didn't think about it too much. About a week later, it happened again. It was the same order, and the exact same thing happened. Someone paid at the first window and then drove off before picking up the food. I remember thinking, that's strange. Someone did the exact same thing last week. But I wasn't quite able to connect the dots at that point. I just figured it was a coincidence. It wasn't until it happened a third time that I realized it was the same person. The same cadence of the voice, the same hesitation before placing the order. At that point, I knew something weird was going on, but I wasn't going to complain. The food was made, paid for, and I was the one who got to enjoy it. So, I kept eating the free Whopper meals and tried not to think too hard about why some random dude was essentially buying me dinner every few days. This went on for a few more weeks. The guy would show up every 4 or 5 days, always late, usually between 1 and 3 a.m., and always with the same order. I started to almost look forward to it in a weird way. Like, oh, it's been a few days. Wonder if my mysterious benefactor is going to show up tonight. One night, I was working the speaker at around 2 a.m. when I heard that familiar voice through the speaker. I knew what was about to happen, and I was right. He ordered the same meal, which I knew I'd be eating. But this time, he said something else. Something that made me freeze up. He said, and I'll never forget this, "I hope you've been enjoying those Whoppers, Mr. Hurley. My last name is Hurley. I don't wear a name tag with my last name on it. It's not posted anywhere customers can see. There's no reason at all that this guy should know my last name." I just stood there for a second, not saying anything. My brain couldn't catch up. Then I started talking into the speaker, asking who this was, what he wanted, how he knew my name. I must have said, "Who is this?" 4 or 5 times, but he never answered. And this time, he didn't even pull up to pay. I heard his engine rev, and then he was gone. I was rattled for the rest of my shift. There was nothing I could do, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Little did I know, things were about to get much worse. When I got home after my shift, I found a note on my doorstep. It was a handwritten note that said, "I know what you did. You have 3 days." I just stood there staring at it with my hand shaking, and I started feeling really, really sick, like someone had punched me in the gut. I have no idea what I supposedly did. I've been racking my brain trying to think of anything that could explain this, but I've got nothing. This sounds so stupid, but I don't have enemies or secrets. I'm a 24-year-old guy that works at Burger King and plays video games on his days off. I'm not exactly living the most exciting life. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I just sat on my couch with the lights on, dreading whatever was going to happen next. But nothing happened. I had no choice but to just move on. Turned out I wouldn't have to wait that long because the next night at work, that guy was back. This time, he didn't even bother playing games. Instead of ordering food, he just said, "Write this down." Then, before I could even respond, he gave me an address. It was some random place on the outskirts of town in an area I didn't recognize. And then he told me I had 2 days to deliver him 10,000. I damn near laughed at that. I didn't think he was serious, but the ice in his voice told me he clearly wasn't kidding. As soon as he drove off, the terror came crashing back. There was absolutely no way I'd be giving that guy 10,000. I didn't even have 10,000. I still don't. So I decided to ignore it. I figured it had to be some elaborate scam or a prank from someone I knew. I should have called the police right then, but I didn't even think of that. 3 nights later, I thought things were over. I hadn't dropped any money off, and nothing had happened. But of course, I was wrong. I was sitting there watching TV, winding down from my shift, when out of nowhere, I was jolted up by the sound of shattering glass. I hit the floor on instinct, thinking someone was shooting at me. But when I finally got up and looked around, I realized someone had just thrown a rock through my window. By the time I went to look outside, whoever had been there was long gone. This time, I called the police. I told them everything, including the address I had been given, and they said they'd check it out and told me to stay vigilant. They really didn't do much. They just told me they'd patrol the area a little more closely, and that without any doorstep footage, which I obviously don't have, there was nothing they could do. And that was 3 days ago. I've called in sick to work the last 3 nights. But I don't even think that's going to do anything since the guy clearly knows where I live. I can't afford to not work, and I can't afford to move. So, I'm stuck in this nightmare until the police can track that person down. I think I might try getting them to track the credit card number that the guy used to pay for the Whopper meals. But other than that, I'm not really sure what to do. Why I got targeted, I have no idea. Hopefully, things don't escalate from here. I graduated from college about 8 months ago with a degree in communications, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, has been incredibly useful in helping me secure gainful employment. That's sarcasm, by the way. I'm still living with my parents, and I haven't been able to find a real job yet, so I'm off to a great start. In the meantime, I drive for Uber and Uber Eats, sometimes both in the same night, depending on what's popping. It's not a career, but it's money, and it lets me feel like I'm doing something productive while I figure my life out. I drive mostly on weekend nights, Friday and Saturday, usually from around 9 p.m. until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. That's when the surge pricing kicks in and the drunk college kids need rides home from the bars downtown. It's not technically a night shift, but it feels like one. This happened a few weeks ago. It was a Saturday night, maybe around 1:30, and I was about ready to call it. I was about to turn off the app when one more request came through. The pickup was downtown, which was fine, but the drop-off location was really far away, past the suburbs even. I almost declined it for that reason, but the fare was too good to pass up. The girl I picked up was completely normal, just tired and quiet. The drive took about 40 minutes. By the time I dropped her off at the edge of a rural neighborhood, it was well past 2 a.m., and then I was alone, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere with a 40-minute drive back to civilization. I turned the car around and started heading home. Not 10 minutes into the drive, I saw a car stopped in the middle of the narrow country road with its hazards flashing. I approached cautiously and realized there were 2 people standing in front of the car, waving their arms like they were trying to flag me down. My first instinct was actually not to stop, but I'm someone who can't just ignore a person in need. So, against my better judgment, I decided to stop. I stopped my car about 20 feet away from them and rolled my window down a few inches, just enough to hear them, but not enough for someone to reach inside. It was a middle-aged couple, which actually put me at ease a little. That is, until they started talking. The woman did most of the talking. She had this frantic energy about her, but also something that felt slightly rehearsed, like she'd given the speech before. She said they were warning drivers about a collapsed bridge ahead. She went on to say it happened earlier that day and they'd almost driven right off themselves. She pointed down the road into the inky darkness and said if I kept going that way, I'd end up in the river. So, naturally, I asked them what I should do instead. The husband, who hadn't spoken until then, pointed back the way I came. He said there was a turnoff about halfway between where we were and the bridge. He said it cut through the woods and that it would add some time to my drive, but it would get me back to the main highway without having to deal with the bridge. They both smiled, but it didn't reach their eyes. It was a grim, tight-lipped smile. I thanked them and started driving. Something felt off. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. I was going to trust my gut and just drive the way I had been intending to go. About a mile down the road, I saw the turnoff they'd been talking about. It was this narrow dirt path that disappeared into the dense trees, and it was barely wide enough for one car. It looked less like a road and more like a forgotten trail. My skin crawled. I decided to keep driving, and a few minutes later, I reached the bridge. I slowed to a crawl, my heart hammering against my ribs. But the bridge was fine. It wasn't collapsed. It didn't even look damaged at all. The old concrete gleamed under my headlights, perfectly intact. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I drove across it without any issues and made it back to the main highway a few minutes later. Even though nothing happened, the experience stuck with me to the point where I didn't sleep well that night. Kept thinking about what would have happened if I had followed that couple's instructions. If I had turned down that dirt road alone in the middle of the night. A few days later, the curiosity, or maybe the need for closure, got the better of me and I did something stupid. I drove back out there. It was the middle of the afternoon this time, broad daylight, which made me feel slightly less insane about the whole thing. I retraced my route from that night. Those people weren't there this time, obviously. When I got to the turnoff, that dirt path into the woods, I slowed down and pulled over. To my surprise, there was something new. There was a sign nailed to a tree right at the entrance of the path. It was a crude, hand-painted sign that simply said, "Dead ND." That sign hadn't been there before. I would have definitely noticed it that night, even in the dark. The wood looked fresh, the paint stark and red. Someone had put it up in the last few days. I sat in my car for a minute, staring at the path. In the daylight, it didn't look quite as ominous. It was just a narrow dirt road that disappeared into some dense trees. I wanted to explore it a little to prove to myself it was nothing, but I was worried about my car getting stuck, so I decided to go on foot. I'm not sure what I was expecting to find, but with the sun high in the sky, I really wasn't scared at all. I turned off my engine. The silence of the woods pressed in immediately. As soon as I stepped out of the car, though, I got a bad feeling. The air was cooler here, still and heavy. I stood there at the edge of the path trying to see further down, but there wasn't much to see really, just shadows and trees. I don't know what it was, but something about standing there and actually being out in the open discouraged me from walking in. The cheerful bravery I felt in the car evaporated. Things went from 0 to 100 in about 2 seconds. As I was turning around, deciding to abandon this foolish idea and walk back to my car, I heard a scream ring out behind me. It was this awful, blood-curdling scream, definitely a woman's, and it came from somewhere deep in the woods down that path. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated agony, sharp and short, and then it was cut off abruptly. I can't tell you how fast I was out of there. Before I could even think, my body was moving. I scrambled back into my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. The engine roared to life and I peeled away, kicking up gravel and dust. I didn't look back. I don't think I've ever been so scared before, and that was about 2 weeks ago. I haven't been back to that spot since. But here's the thing. I can't stop thinking about it. That scream echoes in my head when I try to sleep. Part of me knows I should just leave it alone, report it and forget it. But a darker, more stubborn part has been thinking about asking one of my friends to come out there with me, armed with more than just curiosity. If I do, I'll record everything. But for now, all I can really do is wonder about that scream, and about those 2 people on the road who tried to send me into the woods. A few winters ago, I was working overnight security for a commercial warehouse complex. I was 26 and had been doing the job for about 8 months. The shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I was always the only employee on the site. There was a supervisor I could call if something went wrong, but for the most part, it was just me, the cameras, and the vast, echoing silence. The complex was in an industrial area on the edge of a small city. Most nights followed the same mind-numbing routine. Clock in, do a walkthrough of the exterior, then settle into the security office to monitor the cameras, with another patrol every hour. The warehouse stored mostly industrial equipment and bulk supplies, nothing particularly exciting or valuable. The night everything went sideways started normally. It was cold, with a light snow dusting the ground. I did my first patrol. Everything was secure, and I went back to the office, grateful for the heater. Around 1:30 a.m., I got a motion alert on one of the loading dock cameras. This wasn't unusual. The system was sensitive. Wind or a stray animal could trigger it. I pulled up the feed and watched for a minute, but everything looked normal. Just the empty dock and snow drifting past the harsh glow of the floodlights. But the alerts kept coming. Every 10 or 15 minutes, the same camera would trigger. Each time I checked, I'd see nothing. What started to bother me was that the movement always seemed to happen just at the edge of the frame, in the deep pool of shadow beside bay door 3. Like something was there but darting out of view just as the camera refreshed. By 2:30 a.m., I had maybe 6 or 7 alerts from that single camera. No other cameras were triggering, just that one. A cold knot of unease began to tighten in my gut. At 3 a.m., I went outside to check it myself. The snow had mostly stopped, and the complex was dead silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy and watchful. My flashlight beam cut through the dark as I walked the full perimeter of the dock area. All the bay doors were closed and locked. There were no footprints in the fresh snow except for my own. A lonely trail leading from the office and back. I saw nothing. I told myself it was a glitch, a rodent, anything but what my primal brain was whispering. I went back inside, the warmth of the office feeling less comforting than before. About 20 minutes later, I heard it. A loud, metallic SRE, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. It came from inside the warehouse itself, somewhere deep in the building's belly. My heart leapt into my throat. I immediately checked all 6 interior camera feeds. They showed nothing but empty aisles and silent shelves. I was starting to freak out. A creeping sensation that I was being toyed with, watched from the shadows just outside the camera's sight. I explained the noise away. Old building, shifting materials, the wind. I had to. An hour later, though, I heard it again. It was louder this time. The dragging sound, followed by a sharp, definitive bang. Like a heavy object had been thrown against one of the interior metal doors. This was no trick of the wind. I cycled through the cameras again, my fingers clumsy on the mouse. Nothing on 1 through 5. But when I got to camera 6, which covered the far northwest corner, the feed flickered. It went black for 3 full seconds, filled with digital static, and then it came back. But something was different. The angle had shifted, just a few degrees to the left, like someone had physically bumped the camera or adjusted its position. That was it. Protocol. I grabbed my heavy flashlight and my radio, my only lifeline, and headed into the warehouse. The door from the office led into a short hallway, and then I was in the main storage area. It was massive, probably 80,000 square feet of industrial shelving arranged in long, canyon-like aisles. During the day, it was bright and bustling. At night, the overhead lights were dimmed to a sickly yellow half-light, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move on their own. I was maybe halfway down the main central aisle, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the cavernous space, when I heard it, footsteps coming from somewhere to my left. Not mine. They were lighter, quicker. Someone walking maybe 2 or 3 aisles over, parallel to me. I stopped dead. The other footsteps stopped instantly. I stood there, trying to control my breathing, which sounded ragged and far too loud in the utter silence that had descended. I remember the tension, a physical pressure in my chest, standing there frozen, waiting for a sound I wasn't even sure I wanted to hear. After what felt like an eternity, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to break the silence. In what I hoped was a firm, authoritative voice, I called out, "Security! This is private property. Show yourself now and make this easy." Silence. A thick, swallowing silence. Then, from much closer than before, from the very next aisle, I heard a low, wet chuckle. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, and it was utterly inhuman. A gurgling, rasping sound that didn't belong in a place of steel and concrete. That was all I needed. My courage shattered. I turned and ran, not back the way I came, but deeper into the maze of shelves, my flashlight beam jerking wildly. I heard the footsteps again, keeping pace with me, then speeding up, closing the distance. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I took a sharp turn, then another, my only thought to lose whatever was behind me. I finally found an emergency exit door, slammed the bar open, and burst out into the cold night air, gasping. I didn't stop running until I was back in the office, locking the door behind me. I saw and heard nothing for the rest of the shift, but that didn't make me feel any better. I sat rigid in my chair, staring at the bank of monitors, expecting a face to appear in every shadow. I reported everything to my supervisor in the morning. Maintenance did a full inspection. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints inside, no displaced items. The camera was fine, they said. Must have been a temporary power glitch. I could tell from their polite, patronizing smiles that they didn't believe a word of my story. But I know what I heard, and I know, with a cold certainty that still wakes me up at night, that something was in there with me. Something that knew I was alone, and was letting me know it was there, too. This memory still terrifies me. Outside of the police and some close family, this is my first time fully revisiting it. A few years back, I had my first job at a 24-hour gym. I was in a gap year between high school and college, so I worked a lot of night shifts. The gym was open 24/7 and accessed by keycard only, meaning often there were only 1 or 2 employees working. My job was simple: sit in the office, monitor the cameras, and do occasional light cleaning. This one night, I was working from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. It was around 2 a.m., and I had finished my rounds. The gym was quiet, with just a couple of regulars I recognized, grinding out their late-night routines. I settled in to watch the cameras. That's when I first saw him, a man on a treadmill in the far corner, near the weight racks. New faces weren't unusual, but something about him immediately caught my attention. He was running, not jogging, sprinting. I pulled up his treadmill's live stats on my monitor. He was holding a steady 9.5 miles per hour. Impressive. But then 10 minutes passed, then 15. He hadn't slowed a fraction. His pace was machine-like, relentless. I zoomed the camera in. He was wearing ragged, gray sweatpants and a stained tank top. He had long, greasy hair that stuck to his neck. His face was a blank, emotionless mask, staring straight ahead at the concrete wall, eyes unblinking. And then I noticed his feet. He was barefoot. He had been running at nearly 10 miles per hour for over 15 minutes barefoot. A deep sense of wrongness settled over me. We had a strict shoes-required policy. I used that as my excuse. I had to go talk to him to break this weird trance. I left the office and walked onto the gym floor. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of his sprint grew louder. I turned the corner into the cardio section, and my heart simply stopped. The treadmill was a scene from a nightmare. It was covered in blood. With every punishing step, his shredded feet slapped against the belt, spraying dark droplets onto the console, the handrails, the floor. His soles were a ruin of raw flesh. His face, however, hadn't changed. Stone cold, mouth hanging slightly open, not in exhaustion, but in a slack, vacant expression. He looked like he was in another world entirely. Terror glued me to the spot for a second. This wasn't just weird. It was a sign of profound, dangerous instability. But I was the employee. I had to say something. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice trembling. "You need to stop. You need shoes on the equipment." He didn't turn, didn't even flinch. The thud-thud-thud continued, now with a wet, sickening sound. "Hey! Stop the machine!" I shouted, stepping closer. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, his head turned towards me. His eyes, glassy and distant, locked onto mine. His mouth moved. "Are you there?" he rasped. The voice was chilling, dry, cold, and devoid of any emotion or breathlessness, which was impossible given his effort. "What? Stop. Now!" I demanded, pointing at the stop button. "Are you there?" he repeated, his head swiveling back to face the wall, his pace never faltering. The pool of blood on the floor behind the treadmill was spreading. This was beyond me. I retreated to the office, my hands shaking. I picked up the phone to call the police. As I dialed, I glanced at the monitor for his camera. He was staring directly into the lens, sprinting, bleeding, mouth open in that same hollow gape. his eyes now fixed on me through the camera. A silent, horrific communication. I looked away for a second, and when I looked back, he was gone from the treadmill. I frantically clicked through the feeds. He wasn't on the gym floor, not in the locker rooms. My cursor hovered over the feed for the employee hallway. There he was, standing 6 feet from the office door, just outside the range of the motion sensor light, a dark silhouette. I didn't hesitate. I lunged and slammed the deadbolt home. Almost instantly, the doorknob rattled violently. Then the screaming started. It wasn't a human scream. It was a deep, guttural roar of pure fury, so loud. It vibrated the door in its frame. He began pounding on it, not with fists, but with what sounded like his whole body. I was on the phone with dispatch, yelling over the noise, begging them to hurry. They said 5 minutes. Felt like a lifetime. He kept screaming, a continuous, mindless sound, shaking the door as if trying to tear it off its hinges. And then suddenly it stopped. The silence was more frightening than the noise. I checked the hallway camera. He was gone. The police arrived, searched the entire building, and found nothing. No trace of blood on the floor where he'd been running. No sign of forced entry. It was as if he'd never existed. I quit the next day. I never got an explanation. I still don't know what he was, or what he wanted when he asked, "Are you there?" But sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up hearing that wet, rhythmic thudding, and I wonder if he was asking me, or something else that was in there with us.